Hello there, and welcome to the Thank You Fellows podcast. My name is Caleb Keith, and today I am joined by my father, Scott Keith, by Adam Francisco, and by Bruce Hillman. Today we are picking up a topic we've done in the past, but not with Bruce, and it was on the magical list, so I thought, why not revisit it? It's been a good topic for us in the past, and is related to some books that we haven't plugged on the show in a long time that may be worth your while. So today we are going to talk about the theology of friendship, and I think Bruce's list actually wanted to focus on friendship in the Bible or New Testament, something like that.
I was thinking
specifically
an ancient world and then making parallels to today, but we don't have to do that. With the match list suggestion.
Yes, it's like
Now the list has a mind of its own.
Yeah, it's like the sorting hat. Yeah,
It's like AI.
It's like AI. Maybe the list was generated by AI. We don't really know.
It's reaching out to other lists, plotting against us. God.
Wow,
I'm
Adam,
much of a Terminator fan to have that conversation too long.
Adam has such a great grasp of how it works too, though. Right?
Only because I heard it the other day on something.
Oh, okay.
I'm just parroting what I heard on probably the radio.
That's good. Radio's not dead.
Hey, real quick. So we did the movie thing. What was that last episode?
Yeah.
I watched a movie last night. Actually, it took 2 nights because I probably off
We did too.
No.
Remember?
Nefarious.
Nefarious.
If you can get it streaming on Prime.
That's
It's really good. It's
can we
set.
and go see the Barbie movie?
Oh, you saw.
Caleb and I. So I will say, this is referring to the last show, of course, or whenever it airs. How I plugged the Mission Impossible movies. I have now seen the new Mission Impossible and Oppenheimer, and can tell you that if you have a spare 3 hours, I would go see the new Mission Impossible movie.
Okay. It's a little off topic, but is Oppenheimer worth the hype?
It's good.
Okay.
Is it worth the hype?
Can't live up
Here's
to the hype,
here's the thing. I'm going to be
Actually, be really be mean to the audience. We're not our audience.
to the common man.
Yeah.
Here. The thing about it is, it's a 3-hour in-depth movie about a historical figure in American history that very few people know anything about. And I think what has happened is that people have gotten sucked into the marketing hype of Barbie and Oppenheimer, and have gone in droves to go see Oppenheimer when they have no clue what they're getting into. I think they're thinking like this is a World War II action movie about bombing Japan or some such thing, and it's really, if you haven't seen it yet, you're planning to, it's really, really not about that. It's about it's a character movie about a single character, J. Oppenheimer, who was the one who led the Manhattan Project, which eventually developed the first atom bomb for the United States. The type of bomb, we changed very quickly off of the atom bomb to hydrogen bomb development, but the type of bomb, the only type of nuclear weapon that's ever been used, that was dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. But it has to do with his sort of pre-life story, which is very typical, I'd say it's very typical kind of 1920s, 30s American academic pre-life story. In other words, if you know anything about the history of that time, the entire world is experimenting with other forms of what you might call illiberal politics, fascism, communism, the whole 9 yards, and academics of all sorts, including brilliant physicists, were a part of this.
And drawn to it like moths to a flame.
Drawn to it like moths to a flame. And they still are. And it's about that and how that then influences his life after the Manhattan Project. So
I would say if you have no questions, if no investigative questions of your own about the world during and after World War II and how that still shapes where we're at today, you're not going to find this movie interesting.
No.
If you think the narrative that you learned in school is too clean, too propagandized, and you have questions about World War II and the post-World War II world today, this will be an interesting movie for you.
Yeah, hit me up with an email. I'll recommend some books instead of this movie too. But at the end of the day, I went to the bathroom about halfway through and walked back and saw at least 10 people that were completely tuned out and at least 4 people that were completely asleep. Just because it's a 3-hour dialogue.
Can I tell you my favorite thing I heard in the parking lot leaving, which was just like not a takeaway from this movie at all? It was, like a heavy Valley Girl accent standing in the far. Oh my gosh, Robert Downey Jr. was so good in that. Okay, that was not like, you could say he was, great acting performance. That was not a takeaway of the movie.
But he basically played the Tony Stark after being stranded on the spaceship. That's what he played in this for that whole thing. That kind of old man who slurs his words a little bit and it was really dramatic. That's what he played. It was good, but I don't know. It was fine. It's overly, in my opinion, it's intentionally overly dramatized. If anybody remembers the JFK movie with Kevin Costner, how that was very intentionally over dramatized and kind of like had those scenes that are black and white and then back to color and it does that kind of thing in it. And the music plays a pivotal role in this movie, as does apparently the filming. My daughter told me that they developed a new kind of film to film this movie, and if you appreciate visual aesthetics,
I appreciated the visual aspect of it. I knew you weren't the whole time. It's a little heavy-handed about this is now about Oppenheimer, but
that's all right.
It's a little heavy-handed about how it's trying to overtly make you feel about the consequences and the weight of an atomic bomb during the movie. Like, it doesn't conceal that it's changing the filming or the music or whatever in order to get you to feel.
Absolutely not. It's like a worship band, that comes out and they're like, okay, now you're going to feel excited for Jesus. And so they play music and they're like, now you're going to feel deep concern about Jesus. And
it feels pretentious not having seen it. Like
it's getting good.
It's self-important.
It's really good.
You would be my exception to see Mission Impossible instead of Oppenheimer. For you, Bruce, I would say probably Adam too, just because he doesn't like movies that entertain him. He likes movies that make him think seriously. I would say see Oppenheimer instead of Mission Impossible. I'm just saying, if you just are trying to kill 3 hours and be entertained,
I think you could also,
movie, baby.
If you want to have a wild ride, I'd go see Barbie, then see Mission Impossible, then finish with Oppenheimer, and go.
Yeah, because after Barbie and Mission Impossible, you're gonna need a nap, so go see Oppenheimer.
So it's
see Barbie?
Not yet.
No, but there are some encouraging things about Barbie. Not that I've seen it, but about the ethos that Barbie is bringing to culture is somewhat encouraging.
I would say it was
great because it just doesn't take itself seriously in any way and knows exactly what it is. And it's like a camp film and it just revels in its campness. And just people are like, I can eat it up. It's candy. I'm not expecting anything more from this movie than
I'd say eventually it's going to be a good airplane movie. Sorry, Bruce.
I guess I won't see it.
The movie theater was interesting, right? Because I haven't seen a movie theater lobby, and we were at a giant one. We were filled with people. I was waiting in line to get popcorn. We go to movies a lot. I can't tell you the last time I actually had to stand in line to get my popcorn.
I'd say I went to see Mission Impossible on Tuesday night, and I had to stand in line so long that I eventually just left and went and sat down.
So there's something, I don't know, there's something interesting about the fact that there's some entertaining movies that aren't just politically polarizing to the extent that only 20 people are going to go see it because it's their thing. I know.
But, well, enjoy it because there's not going to be any TV shows or movies for a long time.
Yeah,
it's good. Is the strike still going on? Adam, good.
Not going to miss anything.
What a cranky old man.
I'm going to rewatch all the Star Treks I like in the next year because nothing else.
Adam's going to have to take a break in a minute to go yell at some kids to get off his lawn. He's like, yeah.
All right. So let's get into the actual meat of this episode, which is
a theology of friendship.
A theology of friendship. Right. So maybe I will let my dad lead here. Well, we can do our typical formula. What we can do is, Bruce, you can tell us why this question, why you thought it was important enough to make the list. And then, Dad, maybe you can give a response, because you at one point thought this was important enough to dedicate a book to, a edited volume 2.
I think it's important.
So we will let you guys kind of make the case for this importance of this topic.
Well, my reason for adding it to the list is not intuitive or obvious, but because I know a lot about the ancient understanding of friendship, because it dealt with my patristics work. There was a movement in the 1930s that comes up to the present day, which tries to make eros and philia, which are the Greek words for different types of love, lesser loves than agape. And so you have like this agape divine love. And then because of that, these other loves are seen as earthly and not necessarily as important and not necessarily as good. And Christians sort of believe this too, like, well, there's agape and then there's all the others. But actually, agape isn't a real Greek word. It was invented by the Jews when they wrote the Septuagint in order to express a Hebrew way of putting into Greek agapon, which was a different classical Greek word. And so they were not trying, which is what happened in the 1930s, to say that Jews were not trying to say that agape was in a class of its own. They were just trying to communicate a Hebrew understanding of love that wasn't as popular in Greek, but not in a necessary hierarchy. And what happens is that agape gets developed to such a point that now people believe that friendship isn't like an important love. They don't even maybe consider it a love. It's just a thing. And it's unfortunate because both in Scripture and in the ancient world, it was considered the highest of the loves. In Scripture, if you are to rate them, it should be the second highest love in the tradition of the church after agape. But again, ordering them in a hierarchy is not always helpful.
Interesting.
Whoa, that's a little deep. Yeah, it was deep. I'm serious. We don't do video, but I'm serious, shaking my head. That one for a second there. Yeah, that was deep. I thought so. A couple of years ago, as part of, well, probably more than a couple now, as part of sort of the lecturing I was doing on being dad, that often like morphed into sort of doing men's retreats and stuff like that. And then that often morphed into like, why should men even do a retreat? Is this even important? Which sort of then coincided with some of the, I'd say now, the earlier movements against quote unquote toxic masculinity. I started to become interested in looking into sort of what's going on with male friendship. And around that same time too, you started getting some of the original, I mean, it's more and more of it's come out now, but the original data on what they're calling the loneliness epidemic, which has now, post-COVID, I think, translated to both men and women. But pre-COVID was very much a male phenomenon. And it was coinciding with a high rate of suicidality in men. And I just started looking into it. I'd say not as in-depth as sort of the fatherlessness stuff through being dad, but in-depth enough to be able to do some lectures on it, on sort of the lack of male friendship and the results this is having in the lives of men, and then the results that it's having, I think, too, in the church, but in the sustaining and propagating of the word and the faith within the church, and how this has to do with the gathering together and what happens when you sort of excerpt men out of that situation. And so for me, it was together with, what happens to the transmission of and the sustaining of the faith in children when you kind of take fathers out of the situation. And once fathers are out and they're out of the church, sort of what does that mean when men try to go to church and there's just no other men there? And then where do we develop these friendships and how are they sustained and that type of thing? So that was what I looked into.
Have you ever heard of the hikikomori?
I have not.
The hikikomori is a Japanese term that describes a phenomenon. There's like over 1 million of them in Japan, but it is a crossroads with what you're talking about. The hikikomori are young men who never leave their room. There's millions of them. And it's because they feel that society has let men down and that there's no place for them. So either they can't compete in the Japanese workforce, either they can't compete because the old people still have all the jobs, but they don't date women and they don't have any male friends, so they game. They're online all day. And there's actually an industry in Japan where they hire women to go to the other side of the door and just talk to them. Because what happens is they spend so much time in their room, they actually become like socially isolated to such an extent they can't even interact with people anymore except on a computer. Now, that's an extreme case, but I think it shows like...
It's an extreme case where there's millions of them.
There's documentaries if you just look up hikikomori. There's a lot of free ones.
Freaks me out.
Is this a synonym for, I don't know if this is a bad term or not, but incel?
It's sort of, but incels are often described as having like anger issues over sexuality and stuff, and the hikikomori are just not interested. They've become so depressed and sad about life, they just don't want to engage with life.
There's definitely overlap, Adam. I think that it's like the desired outcome is different, though. For these Japanese, the desired outcome is to just remain alone. For the incel, the desired outcome would be a society in which they weren't alone. So then, yeah,
it just points to what Scott's saying, which is not just in the church, but it's a worldwide problem, and the internet makes it in some ways worse because it can give you a virtual window to the outside world that's not real human touch, and it's easy for people to escape into those virtual worlds as a type of surrogate or facsimile of real friendships, which require work. Like, you have to be uncomfortable to make a friend at first. A lot of times,
well, and I'd say making, now, not always keeping. Let me clarify there, but making a friend takes sort of embodiment. In other words, you have to be with another person. I think, as Lewis would say, side by side, finding out those sort of commonalities that you have, talking shoulder to shoulder as you walk, so to speak, that will make you friends. And I think that friendship, one of the unique characters about friendship is that friendships can be kept with little interaction, or even sometimes no interaction over time, or even remote interaction. But they can't. They're very unlikely to be made that way. And so this sort of removal, and I think that's one of the things I found a while ago, is it was the removal from the possibility of in-person social interaction that has led to the decline in friendship. One of the things that I looked at was, you could start with the one that's closest to us. When church attendance goes down, and then when it goes down precipitously, in men more than in women, they're not having that sort of commonplace. If you're in a church with a bunch of other guys, you have at least one thing in common, right? And so you can start with that one thing and then investigate other things from there and make friends, and it's pretty easy. But when you don't have that social interaction, that goes away. Think of like fraternal organizations that have been on the decline, in line with or faster than church attendance. The societal view of people doing what Caleb does, which is sort of leaving their house to go and do things with other dudes, while the wife and the children are at home, and sort of she's having to manage it while you're gone. That's very much looked down on. And so guys don't do it as much anymore. They don't go play golf with their buddies as much. They don't go out for a beer as much. They don't go on 4-hour mountain bike rides, that type of thing. And so you lose that spot too. And the more of these that you sort of tick off, the more of them you lose. And the one thing I looked at is, that men they have a different way of being friends. And it's harder for them to make quote unquote friends than women. And it has to do sometimes with sort of the nature of the male friendship relationship. It's just being, one that's sometimes less about being able to just chit chat and more about just sort of time together, maybe not even saying a whole lot oftentimes. But if you don't have that time, it goes away. And that going away is leading to a feeling of desperation on the part of men, married men and single men. So you brought up the single man phenomenon, but the married man phenomenon too. I would argue that married men need friends, male friends outside the home as much, if not more, than single men.
And something that people might be surprised with is if you read the ancient stuff on friendship, immediately you'll be probably very uncomfortable as a modern man
with the love.
The way, and I'm not talking about like homosexuality or anything like that. Of course, those relationships existed too. But for example, in the ancient world, the most emotional document where someone actually describes their feelings is about friendship. And it's from Augustine. And it's when his friend dies and the grief he experiences when his friend dies. We have a lot of accounts of people being sad, like when their friend dies, but not like what their interior life, what they're thinking and feeling is like. And Augustine writes that down. In the ancient world, and this might be helpful because we can define what we mean by friend, because I think it's sort of like the word love in English. Friend in English has a lot of shades of...
it has the shade of acquaintance most often.
Right. Yeah. But in the ancient world, friendship was something very specific, and you could identify. And there were only two kinds. There were business friends, and they weren't true friends, but they were allowed to use that word friend.
Like me and Adam.
But business friend means not just someone you do business with, but it means someone that you're a friend with because you both get something out of the relationship. But it's not true friendship. It's because it's just based on really you. They thought it was very selfish. It was like, well, you're getting something out of this. They're getting something out of this. It's a mutual selfishness. True friendship in the ancient world had a couple rules. One was it could only be between equals. So as much as people like to say, like, my wife and my girlfriend is my best friend, not in the ancient world. It's not possible.
I've done shows on this.
Couldn't be friends with the opposite sex, nor could you be friends with someone from a different class. That was also completely not allowed.
There's something that's really offensive today. Obviously, all of that would be very offensive today. But there's something very pragmatic about the fact of realizing that, like, class, there might be some status thing in there, especially from higher to lower. But it's partially the value system and the risk that friendship can share is sort of equally yoked when your responsibilities of your life are the same. It is difficult to be a friend with somebody if the values or the concerns about life don't align. Thus, sort of class can play a role because the lives are so dramatically different. If you both have to care for a family through manual labor, the struggles can be shared and the burden can be understood, maybe with or without speaking about that burden, right? In a way where the burden can't be shared always with somebody there. And, we have a very pick and choose idea about friendship now, or, you can choose your friends that I think alienates the portion that is about mutual struggle.
Here's another ancient rule on that. So you have the rule that you have to be from the same class. You have to be equals. The other rule and Cicero, Aristotle, they all write about this. This isn't like they're very clearly right about their rules. The most important one is that they must be your second self. That's Cicero's term. It must be your second self. So you have to have a lot in common with the person but this develops into something that, again, would sound strange to us. The ancient world truly believes that your soulmate was your friend, was not your spouse. So even the Bible takes this view in Kings, where David and Jonathan are said to have their souls knitted together. So consummation between a male and a female is one flesh, but friendship is one soul. So there's this contrast between Old and New Testament friendships. And this idea of soul knitting. I mean, so when Jonathan dies, David says that, Jonathan, your love for me was greater than that of a woman. And now some scholars think, Jonathan must have been gay. But I think that's a modern reading of that. They don't understand the deep ties in ancient friendship, that was your soulmate in the ancient world. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that.
Can I go off and go with that for a second?
Yeah.
One of the things that I really thought about, and I really found the more you sort of read on this, and even in modern literature, is that the problem that we're having is that we have this is what we do in all of our society, right? In our society, eventually everything has to become sexual in order for it to have any kind of quote unquote identity or quote unquote any kind of meaning. And this is exactly what we've done with, I'm going to put a more generic term on it, relationships, right? Every relationship has to have some sort of sexual dynamic in order for it to be something that we pay attention to. You could see this, even before all of the social, political, cultural stuff that we're struggling right now. You could see this early on, sort of even with the over-sexualizing of teenagers, and then the over-sexualizing even of young girls, and then this has gone into the over-sexualizing of everybody, and then the over communicating about all of our sexuality, and then the prioritizing our sexuality as sort of the biggest part of our identity. And then once you do that, it's very difficult to ever say that you have any relationship whatsoever that is not about sex, or that is not encapsulated in a sexual relationship, or won't find its culmination in a sexual relationship. And so it's very difficult for us to read anything, whether it be from ancient times or even 100 years ago, or maybe even 50 years ago, that has to do with a relationship, be it a friendship or even a kinship relationship that doesn't eventually get sexualized in some way. And it makes it impossible for people to understand how this could be. I mean, when gay relationships became as quote unquote normal as heterosexual relationships, you then cannot describe a close relationship between a man and a man without people at some point using some sort of romantic term to describe it, right? In other words, it was very popular a couple years ago if two guys hung out too much to say, even for their wives to say, oh, he's off having his bromance with somebody, right? It was like, oh, that's so funny. Oh, and like, well, wait a minute. You just turned a male friendship into a romantic relationship, which I have a few male friends. It's not romantic.
And to this point, to the point on homosexuality, there was a book written many years ago by, I think it was Wesley Hill, called Washed and Waiting. It was on the New York Times bestseller list. Wesley Hill is a gay Christian who's celibate. And he talks about in that little book just the struggle of what that's like. And basically if I remember correctly, his prescription for this is pointing to the deficiency that you're saying, Scott, which is he's saying there's a lot of, gay men who want to be Christians and want to be in the church. They grew up in the faith. They want to keep their faith. But there's no place for them in the church because as soon as other men know they're gay, they repel away from them. And what they need to stay celibate is deep male friendships, not sexual friendships. Just they can't have a partner. They can't go home to someone. So what they need is in their lives, they need deep male friendships so that they can harness that kind of thing. That's Wesley's proposal to help celibate gay men in the church. And I think when we over-sexualize everything, not only do we ruin the positive sides of friendship, but you also take homosexual or lesbian people and you give them no place. Is to make it black or white. Like you can't be close to another person because if you are, you must be sexually interested in them.
Right. That's what I'm saying. You see this
nothing.
You see this sickness even like make its way into kinship relationships, and it's just this is the, and I'm sure this isn't unique to us. I'm sure that this has happened in the ancient world too. That was over sexualized, I'm sure as well. But the thing that is new about our culture in our time is the ability to mass communicate these things, right? If some idiot came up with a quippy thing like bromance, in ancient Rome, it wouldn't have made it across the world in 5 hours,
20 seconds.
Yeah, but it did in our time because of our ability to make memes and to put garbage on social media and on and on.
I think that one is probably is old enough to have primarily been TV, to be sitcoms and comedy and.
Okay, so it took 5 days instead of 5 hours. Yeah. But
the last rule of the ancient world, the last rules, one that I think, Scott, your book actually, although you may not use this terminology, actually is working towards, which came a lot out of Aristotle and Cicero, but actually finds a place in Scripture too, but maybe not to the extent that they wanted it to be, which is that friendship should be virtuous, meaning it should instill virtue in the other person. So your friend isn't just someone who you hang out with and you have is your soulmate and is your equal. They're also someone who makes you better and you make them better. You're better together at pursuing the good in the ancient understanding. And in Scripture, that becomes sort of the iron sharpens iron principle. Although I think love is the greater virtue in the New Testament, not friendship, if you had to rate them with Paul and Corinthians 13 and all that. But the point isn't lost, which is that friendship is supposed to lead towards virtue. Your friends should make you better, and that should make you be better in the world, out in the world doing good. And if it doesn't do that, the ancients thought, well, then what's the point? There's a lot of writing about that with them. They don't understand why you would have a deep friendship if it didn't instill and encourage virtue.
Well, see, and I think this too. Well, it's interesting. You talked a little bit about. I think you said it, or Adam, I don't know, but that in this way of thinking about friendship, your wife isn't your best friend.
I'm not saying it can't be true today.
Well, I might be. I might be willing to say it.
The three married guys here are like, but
that was the ancient view for sure.
But think about the insistence in our modern. So whether it can be true or it can't be true, whatever. But think about the insistence in our modern way of thinking about it that your best friend be your spouse. I mean, this is basically insisted on, right? That you shouldn't even get married unless your best friend is your spouse, or that your greatest friend is your spouse, or as you said, let me put it the way you put it, Bruce, that your soulmate is your spouse, right? That insistence is a result on making the sexual relationship, right, primary. So at the end of the day, what is marriage? Well, it's, as I'll say it as Jim Nestian used to say it, which this is what, in my mind, distinguishes it greatly from friendship. It's two sinners spending the rest of their lives naked, belly to belly together, and seeing what happens. Now, Adam's like,
that sounds okay. Where do I sign up for that?
But think about all of the problems that'll come with that, right? If you're naked, all of your sin is exposed, all of your weakness is exposed, all of your flaws are exposed. It's not just the sex that comes out of that, but you are then also staring at it. If you're belly to belly, you're staring at each other your entire life. Every word that comes out of your mouth is being consumed by the other person and heard by the other person and filtered by the other person.
Pattern, every
pattern, everything, every flaw is critiqued and exposed, and you're belly to belly that way. And here's the kicker that distinguishes a marriage from a friendship for your entire life. Okay. Now, a friendship, on the other hand, has these rules attached to it. And these rules are basically trying to describe the benefit of a friendship, right?
They could also be guidelines for ending a friendship.
Well, if it doesn't have these benefits, the question is, why are you doing this? Right. Still, right? I can, even if I stay friends with somebody, I can go years without talking to them and still be their friend. I, to my knowledge, cannot go years without talking to my wife and still be married to her in the same sort of way.
It's a social experiment here.
I've stretched this out to days, and I think I've occasionally found the limit at about 15. And And
My
then things
hero.
starts to get weird.
Yeah.
Right? And then it doesn't really feel like a marriage anymore. It sort of feels like something different. And I think it does disservice to marriage and to friendship.
Well, can I add the damage to marriage that hasn't come up yet, which is if marriage is about being with your best friend and is primarily about friendship, then it is, or is at least that is an essential component. Let's just give people the benefit of the doubt here. Essential component. Then children are an innate barrier to that because they're actually like an object of challenge. They're an object of challenge in the friendship. Because anybody who has kids knows that your kids are the challenge are a significant challenge to spending time with your friends, because now they're the pull for the object of your attention. They actually deserve it and require it more than your friends in many cases. And so you then have to sort of start balancing this. If your marriage is primarily a friendship, then the children are now a tension in the marriage instead of the end of the marriage, right? The ends, i.e. the telos of the marriage.
If Nestigan is right, and this is about spending your life naked, belly to belly together forever, you're not just going to talk, right? And you're not just going to consume words, and you're not just going to look at flaws. Occasionally, something else is going to happen, and the result of that something else happening will likely be that you will make children.
Yeah.
And this is, this production of the family by spending your life naked, belly to belly together with somebody, it's a distinctly different relationship. But culturally, when we've made it the most important friendship, you have lost sight of both. You've lost sight of how important the marriage relationship is, and you've lost sight of how important the friendship relationship is. And the end result is you probably won't be getting the full benefit out of either one.
So what do you say to people? I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just thinking of different people if this is the first time they're hearing something like this. So what do you say to people who go, well, if my wife isn't my best friend, then what is she? How should I see her? Because the people don't know what to fill in.
I think this is partially a plight of the fact that women have statistically more acquaintances and fewer friends. And I think in the close friends, like what we're talking about in this step of friends,
you need more people that they describe as friends.
But they have more people as they describe as friends. And I think part of the plight of when they realize that is that the husband is the person they spend the most time talking to. When you talk about all these virtues of sort of struggle, reliance, a relationship that should better each other, a relationship with love, you find then the husband. And so there is that's who marks the friend list for me. And then it becomes, I think, a competition of, he wants to spend time with his friends. So then we try to eliminate that competition, comfort and bring companionship to our wives, which is important, by then describing that relationship as our best friendship so that she doesn't feel alone. So I don't think it's necessarily designed to be destructive, but I do think it is accidentally destructive while trying to solve another loneliness problem. One that we've been asked, I think, in the past to speak on after we've done these male friendships, but I'm not as equipped to speak on. I don't think any of us are, which is the flip side of this coin, which is female loneliness or isolation in these relationships.
And I get it. If I had the sort of calling that my wife had to, spend her life naked, belly to belly together with me my entire life, I'd be a little bit lonely too. So it makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I think Caleb's right here. But I also don't think it does a disservice to, and I'm not as equipped to speak on this. Caleb's right. To a woman's view of marriage and to a woman's view of friendship, when she's trying to look for that sort of friendship from a man who's not going to give it to her in the same, even if he's trying, in the same way that another woman could. And I think we're really missing out on this here. Well, of course we are, because why aren't people getting married? Well, if you ask them, they're not getting married because they can't find that person that fills the hole for them. All right. That person, that's their soulmate. That person that they think they can guarantee that they'll want to spend the rest of their life together with. I'm
like waking up every day is a decision to spend your life with.
Yeah,
with that
like
person.
Let me tell you, 30 years in, let me tell you just a little secret about marriage. I'm gonna crack the code here. Get out, here it is. Ready for it. You will not want to spend the rest of your life with this person every day. You won't. There will be days where you really don't want to spend another moment with this person. There will be days when you can't imagine the idea of this naked belly to belly together forever with this person. But marriage is doing it anyway and waiting for and working for and hoping for the days when it's all you can imagine. Right? Because you're so dedicated to this person and to the family that you've made with this person that you would do no other thing. Now, that's not going to happen every day. But it's also not a friendship. Because if I had a friend that was that hard, every single day, I would probably just move on to another friend.
Well, you could. You could take a break.
I could.
Yeah, take a break. You could take a break, in a way, especially if the demand isn't there, right? Like if that person isn't in life or death need of your companionship.
Well, if I take a break from a friend, this doesn't ruin my children's view of friendship or relationships or marriage or fatherhood and motherhood, right? The consequences of ruining the marriage family relationship are so much higher. Right? Again, Bruce, the rules that you described are rules of benefit.
And I should say, while the marriage covenant is sort of looked on as eros, like that's the Greek word for love. That's just there. People hear eros and they just go, "Oh, sex." And yes, eros does have, for sure, a sexual shade to it. That's not all eros means. So to your point, Scott, the love it. Yes, one of the distinctions between a friendship and marriage is sex and procreation, but that doesn't mean that marriage is just about sex and procreation. There is a love there. The eros love isn't just a sexual love. That's significantly how it's contrasted with the other loves, but eros has a much broader term. In fact, a lot of Greek scholars will tell you that all four words for love have been too divided up by people, and that they sort of interplay with each other at times. So it's not that you don't love your wife and you can't have, in the colloquial English, be friends with your wife. But it's
you can't share things that you both enjoy, the same reading, the same music, the same television shows,
really enjoy each other's company and
visiting national parks together, having long conversations about politics.
Telos that's different. The gold. Telos is different.
Yeah,
and that's what's important.
Yeah. It's the be fruitful and multiply, the have a family.
The ancients did not see marriage as instilling virtue in people. You needed friendship to instill virtue. You needed marriage to raise good citizens. I mean, that was...
Well, you needed to be virtuous, I think, to actually make it through marriage. And one of the things that would instill that virtue in you would be good friendships. I mean...
I think that's one of the things you were bringing up earlier that's really important, which is a lot of people describe feeling lonely in a marriage because that is the only, let's say, friend-like relationship they're in. And there is no other outlet. There is no, I'm going to go hang out with this other person, or I'm going to have somebody that has a different set of conversations. And then you do start feeling lonely despite being in the presence of somebody who you're constantly in relationship, in tension, with. And so it's definitely sort of interesting. The plight now is that we do have a society of very people who describe themselves as isolated and lonely, but who on the numbers sheet probably have, the most number of acquaintances or connections ever because of the ability to stay connected. you can move 2,000 miles away and occasionally exchange a message with somebody you went to high school with, right? Or grade school or whatever. Like your life is sort of permanent on there now. But at the same time, those deep relationships that would actually, in the ancient sense, as Bruce has been outlining, be described as friend, are sort of non-existent. To bring it to the New Testament a little bit, while we have some time too, the chapter I did in that book was I think friendship in the New Testament. And an interesting thing is that something like 98% of the use of the word friend in the entire New Testament is Jesus in parables.
Yeah.
Jesus uses the word friend the most frequently. It's almost always in parables, and it is almost always attached to a feast. Friends are the object or the people invited, or in some parables, the people you shouldn't invite to this great feast. And so I think the question in the New Testament about friends is like, what is there to learn about friendship from the parables is kind of a dangerous question, because you risk making the parables about something that they're not really, but they're described as, I think if they're members of the party that get invited in, or the people that are gathered when there's a celebration, say at the end of, the prodigal son or whatever, the people you're going to gather around you. For Christians, it's other people who are, received the call into the great feast, receivers of the gospel, which thus means other sinners, other wretched people who don't deserve to be at the feast, but are ultimately then called in. And so I think there's another level when we talk about the theology of friendship too, that requires sort of, I want to say, the risk of evangelism or the sharing of the faith, right? Where I think, especially in America and with religious freedom and autonomy, part of what makes friendship so precarious is that we are afraid to impose our worldview on other people. And then even scarier than imposing a worldview on other people or accidentally alienating people with our political or civil beliefs is then alienating people with our religious beliefs. There's a sort of terror there. And I think it's hard to actually have a true friendship where one cannot extend that call of the gospel / forgive the sins and be a voice of forgiveness to another person, and or receive forgiveness from another person. And so if we don't get to that level of friendship, there's nothing particularly Christian about our friendship. It might be ancient, right, Bruce? It could cultivate virtue. It could be a friendship purely of the law in that sense. But for Christians and for this sense, there seems to be an important aspect about that call up into the party and being surrounded by other members of the feast that is difficult in today's world, but I think is essential if you're going to have, as a Christian, other friends that are people that you can depend on to hear your cries, your repentance, and to answer with forgiveness.
I would actually say, Caleb, and I think you're completely right. I would actually say might not even meet the ancient definition of friendship, because friendship's your second self and you have to be equals. And I would have a very hard time having a close friendship with someone who wasn't a Christian. There's levels of friendships. My closest friends are all Christians because they're second selves. We have to share that. I mean, that's how I see the world. That's how I live and breathe and have my being. I can have people who I'm very close to, but I can't have, my best friendships have to be Christian, because that's what I believe, and that's how I live. So yeah, I think there's an evangelistic point. It's interesting too, outside of the Gospels, in the New Testament, friendship, philia, that word is used pretty much negatively. There's a couple exceptions, I think, in maybe 2nd or 3rd John. But in James and other places, where it's often used to say, don't have friendship with the world or something of that nature. Which again goes to the ancient understanding, the world isn't equal. It's not an equal. You don't share yourself with it. And people think when they read these passages in the New Testament, they're like, oh, I'm supposed to completely be out of the world and, live like the Amish or some level of that on a spectrum. But that's not what they're saying. If you understand the ancient understanding of friendship, what they're saying is you can't give yourself, your soul, to the world. Your soul is owned by Christ. Don't share it with the world. It's a soul thing that they're after, not like being friendly to people or nice or having acquaintances. So I think, friendship needs to be evangelistic, but then maybe to Scott's point earlier, it also has to cultivate. And I think at some point the deepest friendships are going to share faith.
Well, I would say that the real commonality in a Christian friendship and a Christian marriage is going to be the atonement, not the atonement. Sorry, the pardon, the forgiveness, the absolution, the forgiveness of sins in the name of Christ. Eventually, if you have a long enough friendship and if you're married, if you don't have the ability or the willingness to absolve one another of your sins, neither relationship is going to last very long, because you will sin against each other. In a marriage relationship, you will sin against each other. And in a friendship, if that friendship gets close enough, you also will sin against each other. And the ability would be to absolve each other. In a friendship, one of the things that a Christian friendship can develop is an ear to hear when someone else is confessing not a sin that they necessarily committed against you, but just a sin. Some way they treated their child too harshly in the moment when they didn't intend to, but it went too far, or maybe they did intend to and it went too far, or a way they treated their wife or a coworker or something that's just burdening them. And you can develop an ear to hear that confession, and as a friend, remind them and pronounce to them that in the name of Jesus, that sin is forgiven. Now, you can develop this in a marriage too, but so many of the sins that we confess to one another in a marriage are confessed sinfully too as accusations against the other person. That the absolution to one another is very important there. But sometimes just developing that ear in a Christian friendship is important too. I've been thinking, just since you said it, about an inability to have a non-Christian friend. And I have several people that are non-Christians that I would say are good friends. But I would say, as Caleb has said it, they're friendships that are based on the law. They develop virtue, right?
Yeah, when you encounter a problem in those friendships, and you might do this in a Christian friendship as well, though, it never gets further than advice, right? So yes. You can call each other, you can talk about advice, and then you leave with advice. In a Christian friendship, there might be some advice as well that is exchanged, but the advice is not the only outlet the friendship has for struggle, and it's the unique difference with a Christian friend.
We have koinonia with a Christian friendship. You don't have koinonia with non-Christian friends.
Well, correct, and there's no absolution.
Yeah,
I'm with non-Christian friends, so it's a relationship with the law. It leads with advice. Oh man, really sorry that happened to you, and then eventually you're going to get to how it maybe can't, what you can do so it doesn't happen again. And that's fine. Those can be fruitful conversations, but they're not for the forgiveness of sins in Jesus Christ, which can only come through a shared understanding of what Christ has done for you and for the other person. So
I think they're friendships that can get easily compartmentalized too. So some work friendships can be like this, recreation friendships, people you play sports with or something like this. Your kids' parent, your kids' friends' parents kind of friendship where it's very compartmentalized. There are people you would share particular problems with. You might share work problems with, get some work advice. You might, share your struggles with sport or whatever other interest, might share parenting struggle, but past that compartment, that friendship, doesn't share, let's say, the deeper internal struggle. And so, I think that's, I just wanted to bring it up because there's a way in which sometimes these episodes could be just purely, philosophizing about friendship. And for us, when we get to the theology aspect, there is something different. And again, that's one of these things where when we talk about friendship, it's offensive. It's offensive for the same reason as the pick and choose. It's not, I'm not saying you can't have a friend that's a non-Christian. I'm not even saying that if you have a friend that's a non-Christian, you better start evangelizing right now. You might want to do that because you care about that person and you care about their eternal soul and salvation, and you hope for them the joy of the burdens being lifted by Christ for them as well. But there is something limiting about those friendships, and a Christian is going to have struggles and things that can't be answered by non-Christian friendships that can be answered only by other Christians.
Indeed.
So from here on out, whenever I introduce Scott, I'll introduce him as my soulmate. Can I leave with can we leave with some words from Jesus on friendship?
Yeah.
John 15. This is the thing that's been in my head, but I've been coughing every minute or so here. Hopefully I put it on mute every time. But John 15, Jesus says, "No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you." And back to our conversation about, or Scott's point about friendship being, a real Christian friendship being marked by forgiveness. That is the Father's business, is forgiveness. So,
amen. That's good.
Excellent. Thank you for adding. I don't want people, occasionally, Adam, we get some of your other friends email the show and say we must muzzle you on these episodes. So I do want to say Adam is a bit under the weather today, so we were not attempting to muzzle him. He's just
he wants to muzzle me. Give me their names.
So that's very good.
Adam will soon have his own podcast too, right? I don't talk as much as he wants.
Actually, I think I love doing this, bad math in my head, but I'm pretty sure it's safe to announce it on this show.
Yeah.
Which is Adam is getting show number 2 for him called Faith and Reason Exchange. You are hosting it with David Anderson,
yeah.
And you want to tell people a little bit about that show, Adam? Are you feeling well enough to give people a short description of what you're going to do over there?
Yeah, well, we've recorded a number of episodes already, and they've mostly been about the relationship between faith and reason. I don't want to say theoretically, but what that looks like for the Christian. And then we've been lately talking about science and theology and whether the two meet. And of course, we believe they do. And I think last time we were talking about Einstein and Big Bang cosmology. So it's a wild, deep ride. But our intention is to go for, we were talking just the other day, David's got about 10 years till he retires. I've got about 15, but probably longer. So we've got just an infinite number of topics that we'll be looking at from the standpoint of both faith, but also reason.
I think that's very good, and I think it'll scratch an itch for there's so many listeners of the Thinking Fellows that we do a lot of general topics across as many sort of genres of theology and philosophy and history and such that we can fit in on the Thinking Fellows. And so there's people passionate about, specific things that the Thinking Fellows do that we can't do or we don't do every single week. And so something like adding a second podcast on faith and reason that'll, likely have more interaction with apologetics on a weekly aspect and some of those things is going to be really great for some of our audience who have been looking for that, where, Thinking Fellows isn't having those conversations every week, even if we have some of those conversations every couple months or so.
Yeah, the broad heading that we're working under in terms of a discipline is Christian apologetics. Even though we might dabble in what some would call natural theology or historical theology, it's the telos is the defense of the Christian faith.
Well, that's great. So yes, if you have come into 1517 podcast through the broad net of the Thinking Fellows and are looking for something a little more specific on this front, I think Adam's show is going to be excellent for you. I will put a link in the show notes below, as well as a link to a bunch of the other things that 1517 is doing this month. Of course, the Thinking Fellows and the 1517 Podcast Network exist to declare and defend the good news that you are forgiven and free on account of Christ alone. We will catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.